So it's lesson 6, part 2. Pardon me. We've got our form set up. So let's try and fill something out, see what happens. So I'm going to add a new local employer. So Siva, this is Mallory, who's going to be coming to our Project Studio class later in March. She's a graduate of both computer programming and the web program here at Georgian. She is I'll add in their website, which I think is just okay, Siva Creative Doc. So I'll paste in their URL and save. And how come we got a not found? So we could load our form. Notice the URL it's submitting. It's submitting to the same URL, right? We don't have a separate action. So how come the form will load when we click add a new employer, but when we go to post it, Colton, you're on the right track. Yeah, you're at the right idea. We have a get handler for this URL, but we don't have a post handler. So it's the same URL, right? And our .NET controllers work the same way. We had a get and a post method with our forms, right? The get method would display the form and the post method would handle a post request at the same URL. So we've got the same issue here. Like if we look at one of our .NET controllers, for example, here was one of my projects from last week. I don't think this was our class, but so in our controller, right, for a category, for example, we had both a get method for create that loaded a view, but we also had a post method at the same URL. So we need to do the same thing in our node controller. We've got a get method now, but we now need a post method, post handler, at employers create, process, form submission to create new employer document. And notice I'm using the term document because we're creating a JSON document in MongoDB. It's not a record. So this time we're going to use our router, but we're going to handle the post method. And again, with our usual HTTP request response callback. So we will use our Mongoose model to create a new employer from the submitted form body. So we've already got, we used this employer variable here in our get, right? That was our employer with a capital E, that's our model. So it has a find method. It also has methods for doing other create read operations. We're going to call employer.create. And then we just pass in, set up the value. So our name will be equal to our request.body.name. Actually, wait a minute. Now that I think about it, we might have a shortcut. Sorry. I think we can do it this way. Bear with me. Hang on, I'm just going to double check my code. I'm thinking of how I wanted to do it and that we may have a bit of a shortcut. So bear with me, I just want to double check, make sure what I'm thinking is going to work, but I think so. Let me just check. Can we do it this way? No, okay. I'm gonna check the documentation. There may be a shortcut. I want to see if we have to map each field individually or if we can just pass the entire request body in. Well, we'll try it the quick and dirty way. It may fail. So say mongoose.create. I'm going to try it this way with request.body. And we will either get back an error or an employer document. We may have to modify this. So when I've done this in the past, I've mapped individual fields. So the name is from the name field on the form. The location is from the location on the form. But because our model properties, they match the input names exactly, I'm going to try just to pass in the whole form. That way we don't have to specify each field. I'm not sure if this is going to work, but if it does, it's less code. So if we get an error back, we will log it out. Otherwise, if our save to the database works successfully, what should we do? What should we show the user? We've got a few options. What would be the most efficient thing to do after we successfully create an employer? So we may have to rewrite this part, but we're going to try it this way. So what do you want to show the user in the browser? Yeah, we could link to the index, or we could even do a redirect. We can use our HTTP response, and we can just call redirect back to the root of employers. Yep. Now, I'm not sure if this is going to work this way, where we just pass in our request body. It may work. I think it should without us having to specify each field. Yeah, okay, so let's try this out. So I will go back. I'll try to save again. No, don't think I saved my controller. Resend and resubmit. Okay, so it does work. So the other nice thing about just passing in our request body is if we add new fields to the form and we add, like let's say we want to add a phone number, we just have to add a phone number field to our form and a phone number field to our model. And we don't actually even have to change the code in the controller. It says whatever fields are in the form, we're just going to automatically map them to fields with the same name in the model. So we don't actually have to change our code here at all, which is pretty efficient. So now we can create and we can add. So try yours out. See if you can add a new employer. So if we can add and view, then we can okay, so your redirect, make sure when you're redirecting, it starts with a slash. So it goes, the path goes all the way back to the root in your redirect. So we need that leading slash. Chris, it's possible you might be missing that.
Else rest, redirect, fire.
So make sure you've got that leading slash before the word employers. So now that we can list and we can add, let's add the delete functionality. We don't even need a view for delete. We simply need a method and a link, as well as some kind of confirmation. So in our cards, if we add a delete button and add a little JavaScript click event handler where we pop up a confirmation, we can then link it to a delete method in the controller that accepts an ID, deletes it from MongoDB, and just, again, redirects back to our index. So we don't even need an HPS. We don't need any view for deletion. So we'll add a delete button. So in our index, down here, let's add a button. Sorry, it'll be a link. It'll look like a button. That says delete. And our href is going to go to employers/delete. And then we're going to use some handlebar syntax. We're going to append on this dot underscore ID. So that's the auto-generated identifier that MongoDB will automatically assign to each of our documents. So let's see how that renders. So we got a red delete button. Under each one. We probably also want to add in actually, let's see, that's okay for now. So when I click one, I'll save an employer. So when I click the delete, you notice it's going to go here, employer/delete, and then we get this kind of long string. If I click a different one, I get a different value. We should also add, we also want to add a little JavaScript confirmation. So if you click that link, we get an OK, a little modal window with an OK and a cancel. We've used this before. So if I click cancel, the link does not fire and I stay on this page. If I click OK, then it calls the delete. So we'll create an on-click event here. It will be return confirm delete. this up to make it a little more readable. So we're now going to need to go and write a little confirm delete function. It's the same function that we used way back a year ago in our PHP class. Just a simple JavaScript function that will get called whenever the user clicks any of those delete buttons. And maybe I don't like danger, I think I'll use warning. I'll make them yellow instead. For a change. So now we've got under public, there's a public JavaScript folder. So we already have a folder to create our own client-side JavaScript. In this JavaScript folder under public, I'm going to right-click it and make a new file here. And I'll just call it scripts.js. The name isn't really important. This is our reusable delete confirmation. Called click of any delete button. So I'll call it confirm delete. And we will just return a JavaScript confirm. So really simple function. Confirm takes a string, which is the message that will appear in that little modal pop-up, and it will return a Boolean. There's two buttons automatically generated, an OK button that if it clicked returns a true, and a cancel button if it's clicked it returns false. So we'll create this file under public JavaScript. I'll go back to my browser and try it out. So I'll refresh and click, and I got no confirmation. How come I didn't get, where was my little modal pop-up that says, are you sure about this deletion with my OK cancel? How come that never happened? So we've got this function. We're calling it on the click, yet it doesn't seem to be working. So what is going on? Clear my console. So how come, why is our script not fire? Console's not being very helpful. We created a working JavaScript with a method. We've attached that method with an event handler, yet it doesn't seem to work. What step have we missed? Thank you, Colton. We created the script file, but we've never included it. It's not linked anywhere. So our page right now, our view, it can't find the confirm delete function. It's in a script file, but this script file has not been included. So in our layout, the bottom of our header, so this would be our custom JS. We'll add a script. And our source is JavaScript. Okay, so we need to include, oh, and I guess I should defer. So we're going to link our JavaScript into our layout. That way, anything in that JavaScript file is available to all the pages of our site. All the views can access it. So there's our intermediate step. It's one thing to create the file, another thing to try and call a method, but the file has to, the JavaScript's got to be activated, right? It's got to be included. So this should fix the problem. We'll go back, click on employers, and now when I try to delete something, okay, I'll make sure I save my changes. So now when I click, now I get my JavaScript confirmation. When I click cancel, I stay on the employer's index. And if I click OK, now my link fires and we get taken to the delete, where we have this ID parameter. Okay, so we must ensure we include the script in our layout file. And then those scripts are available globally to all of our views, because all of our views are going to use this layout template. So if we have other delete buttons on other views, we can still add that same event handler to call our scripts.js. Sure that we get our little JavaScript pop-up window. So now we just need to write the controller method. In the employer's controller, we need a delete method that also takes in an ID as a URL parameter. So if we're going to delete something, we need to know the ID. We don't need to render a view, so we don't need a delete page, a physical page. We just need a controller method that will grab that ID, use Mongoose to remove that document from the database, and then take us back to the employer list. So we should really just see a little flicker in the browser, and then this page is going to reload, because we're not actually going to another view and returning. So I'll go back to the controller. And this is going to be our get at employers / delete / ABC123. Delete employer with the ID found in the URL parameter. So this is a get. So our URL is /delete. And then to delimit a parameter, kind of like much like in PHP when we use PDO parameters, those parameters are prefixed with a colon. So this means underscore ID, it's not a literal string. This is a parameter that we're going to call underscore ID. And again, we'll use our general express callback with request and response. So we will use our employer model, and it has a remove method. And here we're just going to pass in as a JSON object. Our ID is our request.params._ID. So we're reading the underscore ID parameter from the URL, and we're passing that in as a where clause to our model so it knows which we don't want to delete all the documents in the collection, only the one with this ID. And we will check if we get back any error. So when we call remove, it will return an error or it will return nothing. We don't really need to get anything back. If we have an error, we'll log it. Really the exact same response as when we're creating. Log it out. If there's no error, well, let's just take the user back to the list of employers. So there's no delete view necessary. Clicking the button and then clicking OK, it's just going to call this delete method, pass in the ID. We'll use Mongoose to remove the document with that ID. And then if it's successful, if we don't get any error back, we're just going to redirect to the index method. So I'm going to save that and try it out. Delete when I click cancel. I stay here and my employer's still here, but when I click delete and say yes, it really looks almost like what we saw, a brief flicker for a moment, and then it's gone. Again, we go to delete and say OK, just gets removed from the list. There is a reload, but because we're working locally and Node is fast, it's almost instant. Okay, so 3 of our 4 CRUD operations are now done. Okay, we can add, we can read, we can delete from our MongoDB. We've also moved our sensitive data out of app.js and used the Heroku configuration variables. So the last thing we want to do is we want to be able to edit one of these. So I want to be able to click on, for example, Good or Marketing or Media Suite and add some details. Like I want to add, I think the first 3 we added last week, we added the names and locations, but we didn't add any description. We didn't add any website URLs, which would be useful. So we're going to make a separate form for editing, but we can copy the create layout and then modify it. So when we're working in Node, much like in .NET, we used separate forms for adding and editing. In PHP, we used one form for doing both. It's a little bit cleaner when we're working in Node and in ASP.NET to use different forms. So we don't have to rewrite all the HTML. Excuse me. Let's go to our create HBS and let's just copy all this HTML here. And then I'm going to make a new view under employers called edit. So I'll right click, I'll make a new file called edit.hbs. And I'm just going to paste this in here. So we want to be able to click an employer from the list and have it load our edit view, but our form should be populated. So we'll need to use some HBS syntax to populate our form. So just copy it. So right now they're exact duplicates. Create and edit, they look identical. We're going to go to our index. So we'll come back and we'll make some changes to edit in a minute. We want to make it so the employer names are now links. So when we click, it's going to load the edit form and pass in this ID. I'll go back to my index. And I'm going to make this a link. So I'll just kind of subdivide a little bit my H5. So this is going to go to employers/edit. And much like with our delete links, again, we're going to pass in the ID as a parameter. So our employer names will now become links. So when I click an employer name, it's going to go to employer/edit. And much like with our delete, the employer ID will get appended on as a URL parameter. This. And we could change the style if we want, but I'll leave them for now. At least it's clear they're links. Okay, so when I click one, it now calls employer/edit and passes in the ID. So we will need a get method in our controller to load our edit form. It's got to query the database, select the document with this ID, and then we will have to add some code to the view to populate the name, location, description, and website values into the form, so that our form isn't showing up as blank, but it's showing up with all of the existing values in the correct inputs. So there's our link. We don't need any kind of click handler or confirmation. Just click the name and let's go look up this employer. So now we need a get handler. We'll need a post handler later to process any updates. But first we just want to load the form, select the employer, and pass that employer data to the form so we can display all the current values. So we'll need two more URL handlers. First, it's going to be a get at employer/edit ABC12. So we will show edit form populated with values of the selected employer document from URL print. So our URL is /edit/:_ID. A request response callback. So we're going to call employer.findByID. But this will allow us to just pass in the URL parameter, request.params._ID. So we'll read that URL parameter and we're going to pass that in. So find this document with this ID. And our query will return one of two things. It will either find a single document by its ID, or it will return an error. So we'll either get back an error or an employer in our callback. Again, if we have an error, we're going to log it. Otherwise, we want to load employers/edit. We will pass it a title of employer details. And then we want to pass, so this employer, this is going to be the query result. What document, if there's no error, our query is successful, we will get an employer document back from MongoDB. So we want to pass that document to the view so we can display it. Employer is equal to employer. So this is going to load our view and then give us access to all of the data so we can render it. So when the user's clicking edit, they're not getting a blank form. They will get a form that is populated with all of the existing values. So now when I click, I get my form. The only problem is my form is blank because we haven't added anything into the view to display the appropriate values: name, location, description, and website. So we have to read these from our employer variable and populate them into the corresponding form controls. It doesn't happen automatically. So there's our edit method. I'm just going to grab my water. I'm out of coffee. Be right back. So I'm going to go back to edit. And now I'm going to set the value attributes of my text boxes. We'll say value equals. Here it's going to be the employer.name inside those handlebar tags. So we're passing an employer object, just a JSON object, so we can read the individual JSON keys. This should now populate my first text box if I save that change and reload. Right? I'm going to do the same thing for location and website. The description we have to handle a little differently. So here's our employer.location. Our value here is our employer website. Now, the description is not a regular text input. It's a text area. Text areas don't have a value attribute. Instead, we're just going to print it in between the opening and closing tag. So we use the value attribute of our inputs. We've got input and value. But with text area, we can just print the variable out directly in between our opening and closing text area tags. You cannot use, there's no value attribute with an HTML text area. So by rendering the 4 properties in the form, our form should be complete. Go back, refresh. So we never entered a description or website for Pavlik's or Gooder or Media Suite. But Siva, the document we created today, it's got all 4 properties entered. So our form is complete. But that's okay, because when we add a post handler, this will allow us to do an update. We can add things like a description and a website. We can update this document to complete it. So we only need to do one more thing to finish this, and I think we've got a few minutes to do it. We just need a post method now in our controller. So when somebody makes when we make changes to an employer details and click save, we want to find that document and update it. Okay, so right now, if I submit the form, so let's say I want to go and add Pavlik's website, ASP.NET shop, hiring many Georgian grads. Many people that work at Pavlik's, and I go and add their website. When I click save, again, we get a 404 not found because there is no post handler yet at this URL. So Node doesn't know what to do. Just like we wrote a post handler for our employer create, we need a post handler for employers edit. That will then update the database and redirect back. So I'll go to my controller. This is the last thing we're going to do. choose a post at employers, edit, ABC 1, 2, 3. Update document, MongoDB, and redirect. So we'll use a router.post, same URL as above, at edit /:ID. So we've used a few different methods of Mongoose. We used find by ID to look up a document. We've used remove to delete a document. We've used create to save a new document. And we've used find to get a list. So Mongoose has a neat method we're going to use, which we will call different method. It's called find by ID and update. So our underscore ID, again, comes from our URL parameter. Find the document where the ID matches our URL parameter. The second thing we have to pass in here is the update query. So again, we'll just try to pass in our request.body. So update based on our form. This should map our fields automatically. The next parameter is null. This is query options. We're just going to set that to null. And again, we will either get back an error or it'll give us back an employer. So this is going to try and do an update. I think by now the error handling should be pretty familiar. Log it out. And our response, same thing. Redirect back to employers if it works. So let's try an update, see how this works. Go back, Pavlik's. So I'll put in a description in their website and save. Now, we don't actually see because this page isn't showing those other things. I don't know if it actually worked. So I'll go back and now we can see it's been saved. Or if I add a new one here, A, B, B, 1, 2, 3, and save. If I go in and edit, I'll have to go and check their website. So now I can update. We can see my changes are saved. There's my URL. I may as well add that as well. So Clive teaches here at the program, hires students sometimes. So if I save my change. So now our update is working as well. So we can add, we can edit. Okay, so now we can perform all of our CRUD operations. I'm going to do one more thing just because it's bugging me. Go to layout. AG. I'm going to change this to a darker blue just because I want. Now I'll have to figure out why that didn't work. Okay, so our CRUD is done. I'm going to upload all my changes to GitHub. And then what we'll work on next week is we'll start to implement some security around this. Okay, I'll figure out why that's I don't know why my style's not working. Okay, I will post everything up to GitHub. I do have to run for today because I have an 11 o'clock meeting that I have to get to. So the code will be on GitHub. I'll upload the video in the next little while. And if you have any questions, please send me an email or make an appointment for next week. Have a great long weekend, well deserved, and I will see you guys on Wednesday.